We share the road with millions of strangers every day, trusting that a thin yellow line and a mutual desire to get home safely will keep us alive. But for some, the asphalt isn't just a path, it's a battlefield where ego and entitlement collide at 60 miles per hour. From petty insults that escalate into executions to the sheer arrogance of stepping into live traffic to win an argument, these are the most stupid traffic deaths ever recorded. Case 1. The birthday light execution. The night of May 1st, 2022, was supposed to be a celebration of life for 48-year-old Georgian. She was driving through Panama City, Florida, with her daughter Marilyn in the passenger seat, heading home after a birthday outing that had been filled with laughter and celebration. The red SUV they were in was a symbol of a happy day, but as they pulled up to a standard red light at a busy city intersection, the festive atmosphere vanished, replaced by the sudden sharp tension of a road rage encounter. A gray pickup truck pulled up alongside them, and what started as a minor traffic slight, perhaps a perceived cutoff or a slow start at a previous light, quickly spiraled into a heated shouting match between the occupants of the two vehicles. In the heat of the moment, Georgianne made the choice that so many of us struggle with. She engaged. Instead of rolling up the window, ignoring the insults, or simply waiting for the light to turn green so she could drive away, the verbal sparring intensified. Witnesses described tempers flaring as the two vehicles sat idling at the intersection, the air thick with hostility. Even as the light cycled and the cars began to roll forward, the dispute didn't end. The pickup truck pulled alongside Georgian's red SUV, and the male passenger, Jubal Simmons, decided that a petty insult deserved a lethal response. He brandished a handgun and, according to witnesses, explicitly acknowledged the consequences of his next move, stating he didn't care if he spent the rest of his life in prison. Simmons unleashed a staccato volley of 11 shots directly into the cabin of the SUV. The glass shattered, and the birthday celebration ended in a hail of lead. Georgian was struck multiple times and died from her injuries, while her daughter was left fighting for her life on a ventilator in intensive care. The shooter was quickly identified and charged with murder, but the tragedy remains a stark reminder of how a single minute of refusing to back down from a stranger can lead to a lifetime of silence. It wasn't just a shooting. It was the ultimate price paid for a confrontation that never needed to happen. The surveillance footage of the incident captured the muzzle flashes and the sound of rapid gunfire, a chilling record of a birthday turned into a nightmare. The community was left reeling, questioning how a simple traffic light argument could escalate into such a senseless execution. The investigation revealed that Simmons had a history of aggressive behavior, but nothing that predicted this level of sudden, extreme violence over a trivial traffic dispute. The psychological impact on the surviving daughter and the witnesses at the intersection was profound, highlighting the collateral damage of a single moment of unchecked rage. Case 2. The ghost driver of Long Beach. Akea Janique Owens was only 24 years old, but by the fall of 2025, she had already established a pattern of lethal indifference on the roads of Long Beach, California. Her story is a chilling example of what happens when entitlement meets a complete disregard for human life. In early October, Owens was involved in a high-energy collision that left a pedestrian dead in the roadway. Instead of stopping to render aid or call for help, she sped away into the night, leaving behind only fragments of debris and a grieving family. Police eventually tracked her down and arrested her for reckless driving, but because the full extent of her involvement in the fatality was still under investigation, she was released back onto the streets. Most people would take a fatal accident and an arrest as a sign to change their ways, but Owens seemed to believe the rules of the road and the laws of physics simply didn't apply to her. On January 4th, 2026, just months after her first fatal encounter, she was back behind the wheel in the same area of Long Beach. Despite her history and the ongoing investigation, she was driving with the same reckless abandon that had already claimed one life. That Sunday, she triggered a second massive collision, this time killing 2 people and injuring 3 others. Once again, true to her ghost driver reputation, she fled the scene, leaving a chaotic landscape of twisted metal and broken bodies. The community was outraged. How could someone involved in a fatal hit-and-run be allowed to stay on the road long enough to do it again? Forensic investigators worked tirelessly, linking paint, transfer, and debris from both scenes to Owens's vehicle. Realizing the net was closing in, she finally turned herself in 3 days later. She now faces multiple counts of felony vehicular manslaughter, a somber conclusion to a spree of entitlement that treated other road users as disposable obstacles. Her case stands as a disturbing testament to the fact that some people never learn until the cell door finally clicks shut. The Long Beach Police Department emphasized that forensic evidence and video footage were key to connecting her to both deadly crashes, highlighting the persistence of investigators in the face of such blatant disregard for life. The media coverage of the ghost driver reflected a growing social media anger over the systemic failures that allowed her to remain behind the wheel after her first fatal crash, sparking calls for stricter bail and release conditions for those involved in fatal traffic incidents. The victims' families have become vocal advocates for legislative changes to prevent such repeat tragedies, turning their grief into a push for justice. Case 3. The Interstate Exit Trap. On a Tuesday afternoon in December 2025, the eastbound lanes of 584 in West Hartford, Connecticut, became the scene of a death so preventable it borders on the absurd. A professional truck driver, a man who spent his life navigating the complexities of heavy machinery and highway safety, found himself embroiled in a road rage dispute with the driver of a box truck. For miles, the two large vehicles engaged in aggressive maneuvers, a dangerous dance of steel and ego played out at 70 miles per hour. But the real tragedy began when the truck driver decided that the cab of his vehicle was no longer enough of a vantage point for his anger. In a move that defied every safety protocol ever written for commercial drivers, the man brought his tractor-trailer to a stop in the middle of the live interstate. He exited his cab and began running across the highway lanes, intent on confronting the driver of the box truck. Witnesses watched in horror as the man attempted to climb onto the side of the moving box truck while it was still rolling down the travel lanes. It was a scene straight out of a low-budget action movie, but without the safety harnesses or the stunt coordinators. As he reached for the driver's side door handle, he lost his footing and tumbled into the path of oncoming traffic. The interstate is a lethal environment for anyone on foot, and the physics of a high-speed highway are unforgiving. The man was immediately struck and run over by a large vehicle. Investigators wouldn't initially specify if it was the box truck he was chasing or another uninvolved driver who simply had no time to react. He suffered catastrophic, blunt force trauma to his chest and head, dying in the roadway as traffic snarled for miles behind him. He was a man who knew the dangers of the road better than most, yet in a moment of blind rage he stepped out of his protective steel shell and into a death trap of his own making. The investigation closed part of the interstate for more than 6 hours, a massive disruption caused by a single moment of irrationality. The incident was a stark reminder that even professionals can lose their perspective when ego takes over, turning a routine drive into a fatal spectacle. The psychological toll on the other drivers who witnessed the event was significant, as they were forced to watch a man essentially throw his life away over a petty dispute. The trucking company later issued a statement emphasizing the importance of mental health and de-escalation training for their drivers, hoping to prevent such a bizarre and tragic loss in the future. Case 4. The Highway Shoulder Fighter. The corridor between Denver and Boulder on US 36 is known for its heavy commuter traffic and high speeds, a place where patience often wears thin. In January 2025, an ordinary commuter in a pickup truck found his patience completely exhausted. Reportedly driving under the influence, the man became enraged by the actions of another motorist, perhaps a perceived cutoff or a slow lane change. Instead of taking a breath or exiting the highway to cool off, he decided to bring the confrontation to the shoulder of the road. He pulled over, slammed his truck into park, and stepped out into the freezing air to settle the score. Standing on the shoulder of a high-speed highway is dangerous enough, but the man's focus was entirely on his enemy in the other vehicle. He began shouting and gesturing, moving closer to the travel lanes to make sure his anger was heard. He had turned himself into a stationary target in an environment where vehicles were hurtling past at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. A third driver, completely uninvolved in the initial dispute, approached the scene at highway speed. By the time they recognized a human figure standing in the lane, it was far too late to swerve or brake. The impact was devastating. The man was launched across the pavement, suffering multiple long bone fractures, a skull fracture, and internal organ rupture. Horrified motorists stopped to attempt CPR, but the damage was too extensive. He died on the scene. The third driver was found to be at no fault, as they had no realistic opportunity to avoid a pedestrian who had essentially chosen to stand in a death zone. It was a fatal miscalculation fueled by alcohol and arrogance. A man who thought his anger made him invincible, only to find that a 2-ton car at 60 miles per hour doesn't care about your grievances. The narrative in local discussion framed the dead man as the primary architect of his own fate, having chosen to step into danger on a live highway. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that it was entirely avoidable had he simply stayed in his vehicle and called the authorities. The incident served as a grim warning to other commuters about the lethal reality of highway shoulders and the absolute necessity of maintaining composure behind the wheel. The uninvolved driver who struck him was left with lasting trauma, a victim of someone else's reckless decision to turn a highway into a boxing ring. Case 5. The cost of a gesture. Paula Nunez Linares and her husband Zane Jones were newlyweds, a couple who worked the night shift at a paint company in Hurst, Texas, and were simply trying to make a life together. On the night of July 10, 2023, they were on their way to work when a routine passing maneuver turned into a nightmare. Zane attempted to pass a slower car, which apparently triggered a deep-seated aggression in the other driver. The stranger began menacingly edging toward their car, forcing Zane to move over. Frustrated and feeling the need to push back against the bullying behavior, Zane flipped the other driver off, a common, if ill-advised, gesture on American roads. Zane later admitted that he expected the other driver to simply return the gesture or perhaps shout something back. He never imagined that a middle finger would be met with a death sentence. Instead of a hand gesture, the other driver leveled a handgun and fired at least 3 shots through the rear driver's side window of the couple's car. One of those rounds struck 37-year-old Paula in the back of the head as she sat in the passenger seat. She collapsed instantly as glass and blood filled the car, and though Zane pulled over in a panic and called for help, the damage was irreversible. Paula died of her wounds at the hospital shortly after. The shooter fled the scene, leaving behind a shattered family and a community in shock. The incident became a focal point for national discussions on road rage violence, highlighting how quickly a trivial slight can escalate when a firearm is involved. Zane's regret was palpable. He had only wanted to stand up for himself, but in doing so, he had inadvertently invited a level of violence that claimed the life of the person he loved most. It is a tragic illustration of the Karen mindset in traffic, the belief that you must have the last word or the last gesture, regardless of the potential cost. The case became part of broader national coverage of road rage gun attacks, which have seen a staggering 400% increase over the last decade. The senselessness of the act left the community grappling with the reality that a simple gesture could lead to such a devastating loss and sparked a renewed debate about gun laws and road safety in Texas. Paula's death became a rallying cry for those seeking to reduce road rage incidents through both legal and social changes, emphasizing that no petty grievance is worth a human life. Case 6. The Lawn Pursuit. In Elizabeth, New Jersey, a minor fender bender during the morning rush hour of April 2022 should have been nothing more than an insurance headache. But for a man identified in court records as Gene, a small scrape on his SUV was enough to trigger a homicidal rage. When the other driver, a woman whose identity was withheld in initial reports, attempted to exchange information, Gene became visibly enraged. Sensing the danger, the woman did what many would do. She fled. But instead of staying in the safety of her car, she made the mistake of trying to escape on foot, running toward a nearby residential lawn. Gene didn't just shout or call the police. He turned his SUV into a weapon. He pursued the woman onto the grass, the heavy vehicle churning up the turf as he bore down on her. Surveillance video from a nearby home captured the horrifying sequence. The woman slipped and fell, and Gene drove the SUV directly over her body. Not satisfied with a single impact, he backed up and ran over her 2 more times, while a school bus arriving on the scene briefly blocked his path. Neighbors rushed out, hearing the woman's screams, and found her in critical condition with broken bones and severe internal bleeding. Miraculously, the woman survived the attack, though her life was forever changed by the trauma. Gene was arrested a few miles away, sitting in his damaged SUV, and was charged with attempted murder. The stupidity of the incident lies in the sheer disproportion of the response. A minor traffic scrape leading to a deliberate attempt to crush a human being under 2 tons of steel. It serves as a chilling reminder that you never truly know who is behind the wheel of the car next to you, or how little it takes for some people to abandon their humanity over a piece of dented metal. The neighbors who witnessed the attack were haunted by the sight of the SUV repeatedly running over the woman, a level of violence that seemed impossible in their quiet residential neighborhood. The case highlighted the terrifying potential for road rage to escalate into a full-blown homicidal assault, and the woman's recovery became a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. The local community organized support for the victim, while the legal system worked to ensure that Gene would face the full consequences of his monstrous actions. Case 7. The wheelbrace dispute. The quiet roads of Northumberland, England, aren't usually associated with blunt force killings, but in August 2023, a minor driving disagreement proved that road rage knows no borders. Andrew Pert, a 39-year-old pedestrian, became embroiled in an argument with a driver named Jake McIntyre. The details of what started the dispute were trivial, a typical he said, she said over right-of-way, or a perceived slight. But instead of walking away or McIntyre driving off, both men chose to escalate. Pert approached the car on foot, and the two began a face-to-face confrontation on the side of the road. McIntyre, feeling the need to dominate the situation, reached into his car and retrieved a metal wheelbrace. Rather than using it as a deterrent or calling for help, he swung the heavy tool with full force, striking Pert directly in the head. Pert collapsed instantly, suffering a devastating brain injury. He survived for 8 days in the hospital, but the swelling and neurological damage were too severe, and he eventually succumbed to his injuries. McIntyre claimed self-defense during his trial, but the jury didn't buy it. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to prison. The tragedy of Pert's death lies in the proximity of the violence. 2 men standing within arm's reach allowed a minor disagreement to turn into a lethal encounter. Pert put himself within striking distance of an angry man with a weapon, and McIntyre chose to use a tool designed for changing tires to end a human life. It was a senseless explosion of violence that left one man dead and another behind bars, all over a dispute that neither of them would have even remembered a week later if they had simply chosen to walk away. The judge who sentenced McIntyre noted that the killing began as a minor driving dispute, a stark warning about the dangers of letting anger take the wheel. The case resonated across the UK, serving as a grim example of how quickly a verbal altercation can turn into a fatal tragedy when weapons are introduced, and leading to calls for better education on conflict de-escalation for all road users. Pert's family described him as a kind man who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, his life cut short by a moment of inexplicable brutality. The road is a place where our true character is often revealed in the heat of a split-second decision. Whether it's the need to be right, the desire to have the last word, or the sheer arrogance of ignoring the laws of physics, the consequences of traffic entitlement are written in blood and broken glass. Every one of these stories could have ended differently with a single deep breath or a moment of restraint. Stay safe, stay calm, and remember that no argument is worth your life.